Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Katan, quite a few news articles to discuss this week, a lot of them showing the wars and fightings going in and around the Great River Euphrates. And we know Yeshua Hawkins has been teaching that this will first cause 1/3 of mankind to be killed over that fourth part of the earth and eventually lead to 4/5 of mankind being destroyed. Now, first we're going to look at a story that has to deal with our food supply. Most people would consider salad a healthy alternative to a lot of other foods. However, if that salad is contaminated, it can have some serious health risks.
That's right. In early July, days after eating salads at home and at restaurants, Texas resident Susie Mateus developed diarrhea that lasted for weeks before a test found she had cyclosporiasis. That is an intestinal infection caused by a single-cell parasite called Cyclospora. I had Montezuma's revenge, or dysentery, she said. Something was going on. I didn't have my normal appetite. I just want to get better because I'm used to being in good shape.
Mateus still doesn't know what food made her sick. Investigators in Texas have not named a source, but this week health investigators in Nebraska and Iowa said the outbreak there originated from pre-packaged salad mix that came through national distribution channels. Now the CDC and FDA are looking for the exact source of that contamination, but neither state is naming the company or companies involved.
Both states cite laws prohibiting investigators from naming brands or companies if the contaminated product is not considered a public health threat. Officials believe the contaminated food is out of the food supply as of now. As for Susie Mateus, she was given antibiotics and is slowly improving. I'm skittish now about going back to buying foods. I don't know what to buy. I don't know where to go to eat. Actually, I'm still not out of the woods here. I'm still feeling poorly, she said.
The CDC was questioned as to why the contaminated source is not being made public. They said just because a certain brand of salad is affected, it doesn't mean that that brand is the ultimate source of the infection. Now, for example, it could be coming from a common distributor, a common processing plant, which involves a lot of other brands. So for now, they're basically not saying.
That's right. Now we're going to look to the wars in Syria that have been taking place, and they've actually arisen to another level. Amazing video footage shows a tactical nuclear bomb, that's right, tactical nuclear bomb being exploded in Syria. So far, this is the only video that we know of the detonation of these bombs. Now it is believed to be one of 4 tactical nuclear bombs that were used against Syria. Let's take a look at the video.
Oh, very destructive. Will ever feel cramped for space? In California, roughly 120,000 inmates are being crowded into state prisons designed to hold just 80,000. Prison gymnasiums are being used as dormitories. County jails are also at full capacity. Why so overcrowded? Well, all of this is part of the legacy of California's three strikes law passed in 1994.
California tried to be a leader in the get tough on crime mentality, which in essence packed the prisons. San Francisco's chief jail keeper, Sheriff Ross Macarini, says this is true. And it's important that we continue to optimize our response to public safety, but the goal is rehabilitation. However, California's overcrowded prisons have had limited success at rehabilitation, and 63% of released inmates are back behind bars within just 3 years.
Sheriff Macarini, in an interview with CBS News, was asked about this high recidivism rate. He said it's extremely high. In fact, I think it's failed in terms of the scorecard of how effective it's been. Sheriff Macarini went on to say that locking people up isn't the answer. San Francisco stresses drug treatment programs and other community-based diversion programs that keep nonviolent offenders out of jail.
Well, that might work. Sheriff Macarini continued, other counties, even more conservative counties, and red and blue states, I think, are finally realizing that they cannot prosecute or incarcerate their way out of the problem. Listen, the war on drugs has now entered its 5th decade, 50 years. I think the jury is in and that the war on drugs has failed, he said.
Now, California is starting to back away from harsh sentences for minor drug crimes. Last November, California voted to limit the three strikes law so that most nonviolent crimes will no longer bring a life sentence.
That may work. Well, as goes California, so goes the world. Parents in California are asking a lot of questions about a new law that allows school children who identify themselves as transgender to use restrooms and join sports teams according to whichever gender they choose. The only thing the student has to do is say he or she is more comfortable as a member of the opposite sex.
Well, 18-year-old Logan Henderson just graduated from Santa Monica High School. He was born female. He started taking male hormones and began living as a male when he entered high school. He described the confusion of not feeling comfortable using the boys' bathroom or the girls' bathroom. He said, I just never used the bathroom during school. Wasn't sure if I'd be safe, so I didn't do it.
The new legislation is raising some real concerns. Brad Dacos is a founder of the Pacific Justice Institute at the Conservative Legal Foundation, and he said this legislation is so extreme and imbalanced. Here you have girls in the locker room taking their showers, and yet you also have a boy that can come in there undressed, be naked at the same time. This allows a large male to play on the girls' wrestling team. And now this is, of course, speaking of wrestling, is a high-touch, high-impact sport. And this is going to cause many girls to feel violated when you have a male wrestling a female.
Supporters of the legislation say school systems in Los Angeles and San Francisco have been operating under similar rules for years with no problems, and that transgender students need this help. Now, in San Francisco School District, there are some 55,000 students, and of those, 350 identify themselves as transgender. And on one final note, Katan, they are expecting lawsuits to come before this new law takes effect January 1st.
I agree. They need help. I just don't think that's the answer. Well, technology continues to increase. The world's biggest ship has set sail. Being called the Triple E class, it's been built for a container company, Maersk. The name Triple E is derived from the class's 3 design principles: economy of scale, energy efficient, and environmentally improved. The massive ship is 400 meters long, which is more than 5 jumbo jets laid end to end. Wow. 59 meters wide and 79 meters high. It can hold 18,000 20-foot containers, and that's enough space, Jeff, for 36,000 cars.
That's big.
It sure is.
The Israel and Palestinian talks were shrouded in secrecy as talks restarted for the first time in 3 years. Now, video released recently showed Zippy Livni of Israel and Saeb Erekat of the Palestinians at an undisclosed location. Both sides appeared cautious of any breakthroughs. Now, this meeting came just hours after Israel released 26 Palestinian prisoners in efforts to revive these stalled talks.
A Palestinian official stated that both sides had to agree to meet. They agreed to meet weekly, alternating locations between Jerusalem and Jericho, located in the West Bank. Now, of course, it's the same occupied West Bank that, of course, have threatened to derail peace talks in the past, because recently Israel has made plans, an announcement of those plans to build more settlement homes in those disputed areas in East Jerusalem.
Secretary Kerry stated in a press conference that they had known there would be a continuation of building in some places and that the Palestinians understand that. He doesn't believe that it'll be a speed bump in the talks, but underscores the importance of getting to the negotiating table to resolve the problems regarding security and borders. Now, once those questions are resolved, the issue of settlements will also be resolved.
Well, to continue our ongoing report for the crisis in Egypt, we're going to turn it over to Larry McGee, who has some updates for us as regards to the turmoil unfolding in Egypt at this time. Larry, what do you have for us?
Egypt is currently under lockdown, guys. And after a state-imposed nighttime curfew, every house is shut up and no one is allowed to go out or come in. The Egyptian interim government has declared a state of emergency and has authorized police to use fatal force on its citizens. This while many people are still reeling from this week's attack on the Al-Imam Mosque. Heart-wrenching photos show the brutality of the crackdown by the army as rows of rotting corpses wrapped in ice to combat decomposition line the floor of the grief-stricken mosque. Relatives arrived in a steady stream to retrieve the dead, hoping for the closure of a proper burial, and for many, that is where the nightmare worsened. Ahmed Badir came to Egypt from his home in the States to attend a family wedding. His brother took a break from the demonstrations he was participating in and came from Cairo to attend as well. It was the last time his family would see him alive. Ahmed conveyed emotionally after locating his brother's body at the mosque that he was too young to die, and adding insult to state-sanctioned murder. When Ahmed attempted to return his brother home, he was informed that he could do so only if he signed a death certificate identifying the cause of death as natural causes. This despite the gaping gunshot wound to his brother's neck. In all, Ahmed estimated that at least 261 people lay dead in the mosque, some women, some children, and some bodies burned to char. This evening, President Obama responded to the activities of the Egyptian generals by suspending the joint military exercises that the U.S. holds with the Egyptian army every 2 years. Still on the table, however, and not suspended, is over $1 billion in U.S. support paid to the Egyptian military. On vacation in Martha's Vineyard, President Obama gave this statement: "We deplore violence against civilians. We support universal rights to human dignity, including the right to peaceful protest. We oppose the pursuit of martial law, which denies those rights to citizens under the principle that security trumps individual freedom or that might makes right." And today, the United States extends its condolences to the families of those who were killed and those who were wounded. But what, if anything, did the United States do to prevent the tragedy? Analysts say behind the scenes, the government proposed 2 diplomatic options, and it sent Deputy Secretary of State Bill Burns to Cairo to attempt to deliver them, while asking Republican Senators John Kerry and Lindsey Graham to support them. One option proposed that the democratically elected President Morsi return to power for a short time, resign, and set in motion a political reconciliation. The second suggested that the Egyptian army find an alternative representative from the Muslim Brotherhood through whom they could seek a political compromise. When both those efforts failed, the report is that the U.S. still urged military restraint, but to no avail. The value of Egypt can hardly be understated. It is the most populous and influential Arab country. It is a cornerstone of stability in the region. It has a peace treaty with Israel, secures the Suez Canal and the Sinai, and it is also a key U.S. ally on issues such as Syria, Iran, and terrorism. So what transpires in Egypt matters to the U.S. In terms of options, the president could still suspend part or all of the $1 billion in U.S. aid furnished for the Egyptian military, and it could also initiate efforts to discourage foreign investment. Irregardless of the options, what is becoming clear, analysts say, is that the president's patience is beginning to wear thin, and he is reported to have stated recently that we cannot sustain a relationship with Egypt if these actions continue. Yet despite those words, there was more bloodshed this week as both sides dug in and the coup by the Egyptian military spiraled out of control. 2 days after the army and police disrupted their sit-ins, protesters from the Muslim Brotherhood were out in full numbers in what they called a day of anger, and they were met by police authorized to use lethal force. At least 64 people were executed, bringing the toll to 800 since last month, when the army took action to remove Egypt's first democratically elected president. The recent trouble is reported to have began right after Friday prayers. As soon as the mosque emptied, the squares filled with protesters. The army attempted to block off some of the main roads, but demonstrators flooded in from every direction, and the stage was set for a confrontation. The Muslim Brotherhood promised large-scale protests in response to the army's brutal crackdown, and the army warned they would use deadly force to prevent them. The MB kept its word, and the army did as well. The violence became so intense at one point that 2 protesters jumped from a bridge to escape the mayhem. The crowds of demonstrators would push forward, then the rattle of army gunfire, followed by wave after wave of severely wounded protesters shuttled on motorcycles to the nearest emergency room. Distraught, protesters described the typical point of entry for most of the gunshot wounds: the head, the neck, and the chest. They are, one young protester said, clearly shooting to kill. Yet crowd after crowd continued to press forward, determined to protest the army, financed by the U.S. of the quartet, which is forcing its way and taking peace from the land of Ham. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan, Jeff, back to you.
We appreciate your report, Larry. Well, images are coming out of Egypt of all sorts. One in particular is bringing back memories of Tienanmen Square, when a man stood in front of several moving tanks in protest. Now, one such man did the same thing in a town of Ismailia, Egypt. Amidst an attack on protesters, one lone man stood up, raised his arms as if to plead with the military to stop firing. He appeared to be unarmed. For 10 seconds, he stood there before a bullet pierced through his chest, and he went down. Now, his name is unknown, as well as the reason for his sacrifice.
Now, continuing our ongoing report in Egypt, around 20 Coptic churches were set ablaze since the crackdown on pro-Muslim Brotherhood demonstrators. Several Christian-owned businesses as well as schools were also burned. Witnesses said the attacks were carried out by supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood, particularly in areas with little police protection.
Since the Egyptian army moved to break up pro-Morsi encampments, Egypt has been racked with street violence. Egyptians used the web to show Coptic churches set fire, with the majority of attacks appearing to take place in the rural areas of Upper Egypt. Now, one picture on Twitter showed Muslims lining up to protect a church in the governance of Sohak. Now, the Coptics account for 10% of the country's entire population.
The patriarch of the Coptic Church, Pope Tawadros II, sided with the military in the July coup that ousted President Mahmoud Morsi and an Islamist government from power. Now, according to news reports, the attack against the churches is said to be Muslim retaliation.
A day after what is being called a day of anger by protesters, security forces have entered a mosque where hundreds have barricaded themselves, worried about getting arrested. Now, scores are said to be injured inside the Al-Faq Mosque inside Ramses Square. Over 700 people have been killed since the protests again kicked off this week.
From inside the mosque, there have been messages being sent out throughout the night requesting food and water. They were laid under siege with gunfire coming from security forces. And on top of that, many injured, including women and children, are wanting to get out. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood spokesperson reported that the health ministry has been forbidden from releasing the true statistics of the casualties.
The anti-coup alliances, the people behind the pro-Morsi protests, say there'll be more protests every day, so more violence, death, and chaos is expected.
Wow. More protesters have hunkered down in the Fatah Mosque in another location in Cairo, Egypt. Hundreds more are trapped as security forces surround the mosque, determined to bring this standoff down. During this standoff, the Egyptian cabinet declared that the number of those killed during the latest round of protests were just 173, while the anti-coup alliance, which we just talked about, had the numbers of dead people at 223, so a little bit of conflict there.
On Al Jazeera, footage from inside and outside the mosque show a chaotic scene. One young girl actually was on the line with them as she reported on the terrifying activities that were unfolding around her. Gunfire could be heard in the background as she cried in terror for her life and those around her. When she was asked if she was in a safe place to talk, she screamed, "No, no one is safe inside, they're shooting."
She continued, "They're shooting inside the mosque," as automatic gunfire rang loudly in the background. She screamed in terror as the gunfire sounded closer, and soon there was silence from the caller.
Wow.
That's sad. Well, these chaotic events, along with many other tragedies across the world, are unfolding at an unprecedented rate as mankind moves about blindly in hatred and confusion. These horrific scenes are prophesied to get worse because mankind, according to Yisrael Hawkins of the House of Yahweh, have rejected the laws of peace. There is still time to save yourself with the peaceful solution that will stop all wars, guaranteed. Now, you can find out more about the Peaceful Solution by visiting their website at www.peacefulsolution.org. And you can find out what you can do to be a part of stopping all wars by going to www.stopallwars.org.
Also, don't forget to request your free monthly newsletter and Prophetic Word magazine. You can do so by calling or writing the House of Yahweh. You can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on either one of their websites, www.yahweh.com or www.yisraelhawkins.com. You can also email them at info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, you can call the number that's up on your screen now.
Well, folks, don't let the tragic scenes bring you down. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins will lift you up with the great words of peace. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.